The government shutdown may be coming to a close, so we're going to talk about what high income earners can do to avoid a similar fate that many federal workers saw over the last month. This is The Will Whiten Show. So as many of you are aware, the federal government has had a shutdown for the past month. And this means that many federal workers have gone without a paycheck. And that begs the question, what would you do in those situations? Now, I think ultimately it will get resolved soon, if not tonight, soon. Some of the disagreements have been over healthcare and how credits will work for healthcare payments. And so that may be solved or at least temporarily kicked down the road for now. And so this has raised many questions for the federal workers that went without pay, and then also those individuals that have effectively subsidized healthcare payments through the ACA due to a law that was passed during the Biden administration. And that was one of the laws that was up for renewal, so to speak, during this shutdown. And so we'll see whether that ends up getting renewed or not. It sounds like it might not be, which could cause a dramatic increase in premiums for many people that have healthcare enabled by the Affordable Care Act. In fact, there's even some people that are on a threshold of income where if they're below a certain number, say in the $60,000 to $65,000 range, they will still be able to have the subsidized rate. But if they go over that, then they won't have the subsidized rate anymore, and their premiums could almost double. So what does that mean? It means that there are many people that could be incentivized to not earn more money. They could be incentivized to not work because they're concerned about the dramatic increase in healthcare costs they could face if they make too much money and if the credits aren't extended. So obviously, when it comes to the political spectrum, Democrats may argue that it's the Republicans trying to undo these credits and harm people by not allowing the credits to continue and inflating healthcare costs. Republicans would claim that perhaps the ACA shouldn't exist anyway, and it's that's enabled higher healthcare costs to begin with. But either way, I don't think that's the most interesting part of this. I think the most interesting part is, again, what we could all do to avoid being impacted by that ourselves. And so there's two things. One is very obvious, and the second, if you wait for it, is one that many people may not think of. So the first one is the obvious one, and that's have an emergency fund. And it sounds very basic, but many, many millions of people do not do it. They don't even have 3 months of an emergency fund. Typically, maybe 6 months may make sense. That's 6 months of expenses. And if you're wanting to be a bit more conservative, you can even extend it to 9 months or even a year. But after that point, there gets to be the concern of maybe you're not using your money very effectively if you have, say, 2 years of expenses saved up in a cash account, in your savings account, at your bank or something. Because then at that point, then a lot of that money could better serve you by putting it into the stock market or some other investment that you like so that it can grow over time. So having an emergency fund is key. And if you're a federal employee or you have high healthcare expenses to begin with, I think it's even more important to consider this because there have been many shutdowns in the past. And I think by this point, if I was a federal employee, I would almost expect a shutdown every couple years. And I'd make sure that I had money saved up to get me through certainly at least a month like this shutdown has been. But again, ideally, I'd follow the general rule of trying to have at least 3 to 6 months or maybe 9 months if I'd feel more comfortable with that. Having that amount of money saved up to cover expenses over that time in case the worst happens. Now, the corporate equivalent or the private sector equivalent of this is job loss. The job loss. Obviously, there's been many layoffs across many companies, and a lot of these layoffs have been corporate layoffs. There's been some debate whether they're all truly caused by AI efficiencies or just general efficiencies or just trying to reduce, perceived bloat. But many of these jobs have been corporate jobs. And so don't think, I have a corporate job. I'm not employed by the government, so a shutdown, necessarily won't impact me. There are other things that could impact your private company that could lead to a layoff and result in not just temporary income loss like many of the federal workers, but permanent income loss from that company. And that leads us to the second thing. And that is the one that many people don't think of, and that's trying to create another income source. And some people could think about this as, well, if one spouse works, then they could have the other spouse work. So now you have two incomes, obviously work at different places. And then if one of you loses your job, you'll still have an income. Another way to think about this is to try and have significant investments such that those can pay you as well. And I think this is something that high earners in particular can take advantage of, but may ignore. And the key reason that they may ignore that is because of lifestyle creep. If you start making $150,000, goes up to $200,000, you may start to feel that, hey, you're doing great, you deserve it, you work hard, you got to this point, and it's time to spend. But I would caution, try and hold off. Try and defer some of those purchases that you may want, some of those big items. Personally, at one point, my wife and I were both working and we were living on half of one of our salaries. Now, they were both corporate jobs and they were well paying, but not, don't think this was, super high end, programmer type of paycheck. It wasn't like that. But these were good corporate paying jobs. And we made a concerted effort to not even live on just one of our incomes. We tried to live on less and in fact half of one of our incomes. And what did we do with the rest of the money? Well, we did the other thing. Aside from build the emergency fund, we then invested as much of our money as we could to try and build that secondary source of money, that secondary path in case there was a job loss. And now if one or both of us lost our job, it wouldn't be an immediate panic. We wouldn't be all of a sudden scraping together and emptying the savings account or, looking through our wallets or trying to run up credit cards, because we wouldn't have to panic since we've taken the time to invest. But it can be very deceiving. So when you have a high income, many things may look deceptively affordable. It may look as though you could buy so many things. But when you actually try and assess the risk of where you are in life and whether you have some sort of backstop, then you may realize that you really can't afford that $100,000 car, or even something smaller, whether it be some luxury item or even something much larger like buying a home that's far too big for you. So those are the two things that I think we can take away. And especially if you have a high income, to try and not be deceived by that and try and find another way to supplement your income, which could just be through passive investments. And this isn't to say that you'll then leave your job. You could love your job and you could love your line of work, and you should keep doing that then. It doesn't mean you have to then leave your job and only rely on your investments. It's really a backstop. It's really just trying to mitigate the risk in your life of a potential job loss. So I think that's the takeaway. Hopefully the shutdown ends. Have a good night.